Floating in splendid isolation, east of Port Blair is Ross Island, the famous seat of British administration over the islands. It is a great saga of splendor, a bubbling township, all comforts of the garrison, including freshwater swimming pool and ice factory. Ross Island had its origin on the 10th of March 1858 when Dr. J.P. Walker, the jail superintendent, arrived at Port Blair, then called Port Cornwallis, with 4 European officers, several convicts, an Indian overseer, with 50 brigades of men and 2 native doctors to raise the penal settlement. Ross Island was named after marine surveyor Sir Daniel Ross. On arrival here, Dr. Walker occupied Chatham Island and started clearing its jungle. But due to shortage of drinking water on the island, he transferred 3 gangs, each comprising of 25 convicts, to Ross Island at the mouth of the harbour. The convicts were the rebellious, deserters and seditionists of the Indian National Rising of 1857. Known as the First War of Independence. The freedom fighters cleared the jungle and built barracks and other structures in Ross, after which they were moved to Viper Island, where the first jails were built. On the 4th day of their arrival, one convict, number 46, Narunjan Singh, committed suicide at a secluded spot of Ross Island. Unable to bear the punishment and torture, many convicts escaped on a raft or by swimming from Ross to the main island, but they never made it. They were either killed by the tribals or died of hunger. Chatham Island housed the hospital and later the sawmill. Dr. J.P. Walker, the jail superintendent, wrote to C. Beedon, Secretary to the Government of India. Chatham Island, selected as a headquarters of the settlement, is inferior in position to Ross Island at the mouth of Port Blair, which completely commands the entrance, appears to be more healthily situated, is of more suitable size, and possesses a good supply of excellent drinking water. The Government of India conceded to Walker's proposal to establish Ross Island as the headquarters of the penal settlement. So, Ross Island became the headquarters of this infancy penal settlement from the very first day of its occupation. Ross had been entirely cleared and construction work was completed by 1860, such as Superintendent's House, Clerks' Houses, iron-roofed godowns for the commissariat. Besides these was a hospital for naval brigades and Europeans of the settlement. 6 wells were dug. Most of them yielded good drinking water. Besides this, a pond was also developed and maintained for the supply of water. To develop friendly relations with the Andamanese, Reverend Henry Corbine developed friendship with the Aborigines during 1863 and formed an Andaman home. The Europeans established a private school under a chaplain of Ross for educating their children. The British, true to their race, at once set about laying a tennis court and a swimming pool. They secured and provided all the amenities and facilities in the Ross Island, like the bazaar, the bakery, the churches, clubs, and ballroom, public buildings, inclusive of Chief Commissioner's bungalow, secretariat, printing press, supply and commissariat godowns, residential quarters, libraries, post office and infantry barracks. The powerhouse was established by using very large steam boilers specially fabricated in England. The building also housed the ice factory and mineral water plant. The seacoast wall was extended to an extent of 16,129 cubic feet during 1892-93. Gradually the settlement grew and expanded in a few years. The strength of the native infantry was increased to 300 soldiers under 3 British officers, and the British infantry detachment was strengthened to 140 personnel. The British infantry barrack was located on the northern side of the island on a hill. In the year 1861, the administration of the settlement was transferred from the Government of India to the control of the Chief Commissioner of Burma, but was again reverted under the control of the Government of India in the year 1869. The settlement was under the superintendentship from 1858 to 1872, and later on the post was upgraded to Chief Commissionership from 1872. And General D.M. Stewart was appointed the first Chief Commissioner of the penal settlement. The year 1942 saw Ross nosedive with bombardment, shelling and ultimate destruction. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose visited Port Blair on the 29th of December 1943 and was ceremoniously received by Admiral Ishikawa, the overlord of the islands, and then was escorted to Ross Island. Several consultations took place during the day. Here, Netaji hosted a dinner party to the members of the Indian Independence League Andaman branch and the Japanese authorities. After the surrender of the Japanese forces at the end of World War II, the islands were reoccupied by the British in October 1945, but they could not revive the old glory of Ross. Ross Island is no longer inhabited, except for the personnel who man naval installations, and cheetal, the spotted deer, which were introduced quite recently on the island. Colonial houses and buildings in a state of acute disrepair are scattered over the island, speaking of an age when the island throbbed with life and activity. Walking around on the island, amidst the most incredible overgrowth of tree roots and creepers that have made these ruins their home, will surely fill one with a feeling of awe and an empty, mysterious feeling. Ross is our heritage, an important page of Andaman history. Viper Island was selected as a place where the members of the chain gangs were put on the hardest labor. On 8 March 1858, Dr. Walker, the superintendent of the penal settlement, dispatched 4 sections of convicts to Viper Island from earlier stations of Ross Island and Chatham Island to work there as convict labor for cutting and clearing the jungle under the control and command of naval brigadesmen. The island derives its name from the vessel Viper, in which Lieutenant Archibald Blair came to the islands in 1796 with the purpose of establishing a penal settlement. For speedy clearance of jungle at Viper Island, more and more number of hands were needed. Hence, No. 4 Division was deployed there. Later, this island was considered to be the headquarters in that area of Western District. Captain J.C. Horton, the superintendent of the settlement, wrote in his report on the administration of Port Blair in the year 1860-61 to the Government of India that the Viper Island was almost entirely cleared. The top of the hill was cut off at a depth of 16 feet. The earth from there was used to reclaim the area on the east coast. On this level ground, he mentioned that a hospital was raised 4 feet from the ground. Another spacious building with 100 beds adjacent to it had been completed with a fine finishing of boarded floor. There was a lot of space for female ward and dispensary. A small bungalow intended for a kacheri had been finished, and the posts for the resident apothecary's house had been raised. Three deep wells and a good road surrounded by bridges on both sides were constructed. Colonel B. Ford succeeded Captain J.C. Horton and took over the charge of the superintendent of this penal settlement in May 1864. He introduced certain disciplinary methods in the settlement to enforce and exercise strictness among the convicts. He initiated the construction of the building of Viper Jail in 1864. The construction work was completed in the year 1867. This single-storied Viper Jail building was the first ever jail to be built in these islands under the penal settlement for incarcerating the convicts. But time has put a spell on it. The remains of the jail building mutely stands here, insignificantly, in an utmost deserted condition. In the same compound, once there were 4 small and a big jail, surrounded by a large boundary wall which housed about 2,000 convicts. Some of the remains of the brick masonry boundary wall can be seen even today. Lord Mayo fell victim to an assassin's knife and succumbed to death instantaneously on the 8th of February 1872 at 7 p.m. at the Hope Town Jetty. The convict Sher Ali, who killed Lord Mayo, was condemned to death and hanged in the Viper Gallows on Monday, the 11th of March 1872. It was these incidents in the period in the penal settlement that resulted in many more stern changes towards the penal settlers. The Maharaja of Jagannath Puri, Gajpati Bir Kishore Singh Dev, was brought here on transportation, condemning him for a term of life imprisonment in 1879, concerning his involvement in helping the rebels in the First War of Independence, 1857. He was assigned wheat grinding and extracting oil from copra. Consequently, he succumbed to death within months in 1879. The gallows was built on a hillock adjacent to the guards' room. There were cells for the condemned ones on either side. The plan was drafted exquisitely with masterminds. The platform was built on a level ground through which the prisoner could move with ease and comfort. By the year 1864, there was no jail. The convicts were housed in iron chains in different barracks at different locations in the settlement. In 1868, the practice of binding several convicts in the night with iron chains running through their legs attached to an iron ring known as chain gang was started. The prisoners who had been sentenced to chain gang were put to hard labor during the daytime. In order that the severe punishment inflicted there on the convicts might have a deterrent effect on the others, all the convicts on their arrival at the Andamans were kept in the Viper Island for a month to witness the different forms of punishment. Mr. Campbell visited Viper Island in 1872 and suggested the opening of a refractory ward there. The local offenders among convicts were put under hard labor with or without meager food. He extended the time for lodging the newly arrived convicts in Viper Island to 1 year. As soon as the cellular jail and the associated jail were constructed, all the prisoners on their arrival at Port Blair were to be lodged in the cellular jail and its associated jails for 6 months and 18 months respectively. Thereafter, the procedure of sending newly arrived convicts to the Viper Island jail was discontinued. The work assigned to the convicts were of sufficient severity to act as a punishment, and the tools were made so that they could not be used by those handling them to attack jailers or fellow prisoners. Among the tasks set was coir pounding, in which a certain quantity was to be produced and made into bundles every day. The heavy mallets used were fastened, for safety, by a short lanyard to the beam on which the husk was broken up. Besides the wards, there were a number of cells for solitary confinement. Some of these were occupied by prisoners. To maintain discipline and for the protection of the settlement, a military force of about 400 men was stationed at Aberdeen, Ross and Viper, which comprised of the 2 companies of Europe, 4 of native troops and a battalion of military police. After Cellular Jail was constructed at Port Blair, the prisoners were lodged there instead of Viper Jail, and the latter one was discarded on various recommendations. Hence, all the buildings at Viper Island were vacated and the building materials were disposed of by way of sale to the public and other organizations. During World War II, the Japanese had occupied these islands since March 23, 1942. They had also established their station at Viper Island. The building materials there were obtained after demolishing several vacant buildings by the Japanese forces for making bunkers, pillboxes, etc. Thereafter, the abandoned old building materials were disposed of, raised to ground level, barring a few small ones for jails, gallows, etc. Discipline station for the chain gang convicts in Viper Island. The entire island was considered as jail complex under the Britishers. Deserted portions of the infamous Viper Gallows, surrounded by trees of forgotten historical importance, stand as a mute witness of the past to tell posterity of the human sufferings and torture where many of the freedom fighters were once executed. Out of a total of 139 years of present history, Viper Island has played a significant and prominent, dreadful role in the early 87 years of dominant and horrifying records.